The thing about being designated a Class D non-essential human asset is that you get all the interesting jobs. Not the good jobs, mind you. Not the ones with corner offices overlooking nebulae or company-issued starships with decent coffee makers. No, you get the jobs that sound like they were invented by a committee that had just eaten a very large, very questionable burrito. Jobs like sentient fungus scraper, black hole plunger, and, today's personal favorite, labyrinth navigator. High Arbiter Zorp, who looked like a Baroque chandelier that had achieved self-awareness and a bad attitude, floated in the center of the sterile, white briefing room. Its crystalline limbs chimed with agitated importance. You will enter the Thonian maze, a nexus of paradoxical geographies and psychoreactive architecture, it resonated, its voice a complex chord of synthesized tones and wet-popping sounds. It is a place where reality frays, where the foundational axioms of logic surrender to the howling chaos of the unthought. On the hollow display, images swirled, twisting corridors made of solidified nightmares, staircases that ate themselves, and a particularly nasty-looking beast that seemed to be woven from pure anxiety and too many teeth. It all looked very dramatic. Very final. Ava, the human in question, tapped her pen on the datapad she'd been given. Right. Psychoreactive. Got it. So, will I need to file a pre-trip psychological hazard assessment form, or is that handled post-mission? Zorp paused its chiming. A few of its lower crystals dimmed in what could only be described as gelatinous confusion. The form. Asset 734, this is the maw of unbeing. It has consumed 14 of the galaxy's finest champions, minds of staggering intellect, and warriors of legendary prowess. We are not sending you to audit its filing system. Well, no, obviously, Ava said, pushing her glasses up her nose. She had the air of someone who had spent a decade organizing town council meetings and had long since lost the capacity for shock. That would be a different department. But my union rep is very clear on this. Any deployment to a Zone 4 or higher psychohazardous environment requires AB 77 form filed in triplicate. For insurance purposes, she looked up, her expression one of utter, placid sincerity. You wouldn't want to invalidate my posthumous benefits package, would you? A low grumble emanated from the Glorban delegation lining the walls. They were a species that communicated largely through passive-aggressive resonance and procedural documentation. The concept of a non-essential asset quoting bylaws back at them was, to put it mildly, not in the script. Your benefits package is the least of your concerns, Zorp finally managed, its voice dripping with condescension. The labyrinth does not merely kill you. It unmakes you. It will retroactively erase your timeline, pluck the memories of you from your loved ones' minds, and use the raw data of your existence to wallpaper a particularly unpleasant hallway. Okay, so that's a yes on the B-77 form, then, Ava concluded, making a note. Also, I had a quick look at the Labyrinth's founding charter, it was in the public domain database, you really should encrypt that stuff, and I noticed in Appendix C, subsection 4, there's a clause about resource allocation. It says the designated trial candidate is entitled to standard exploration gear. My issued kit contains 3 nutrient paste tubes and a glow stick. The Vex champion you sent in last week got a plasma cannon and a personal shield generator, she looked up. I feel like there's a disparity in resource allocation here that might violate interspecies fairness statutes. Zorp's chiming became frantic, like a wind chime in a hurricane. It was one thing to send a primitive to their doom, it was another entirely to be accused of unfairness by that same primitive, using their own ridiculously convoluted legal framework. The gear is calibrated to the candidate's expected performance. So you expected me to fail, Ava said, nodding thoughtfully. That's fine, I'll just note it down for the post-mission feedback form. Management displayed a lack of confidence, fostering a potentially unsupportive work environment. Okay, anything else? Do we get a lunch break, or do we just sort of graze on existential dread as we go? The grand, terrifying portal to the nightmare labyrinth shimmered into existence behind her. It was a tear in reality, swirling with colors that had no names and whispering promises of madness. It was designed to inspire primal terror. Ava glanced at it, then back at Zorp. Does that have a ramp? My boots don't have the best grip, and I'd hate to trip on my way into the abyss. Workplace safety, you know. Zorp, having reached the absolute limit of its capacity for dealing with this bizarrely unflappable ape descendant, simply gestured a shimmering limb towards the vortex. The labyrinth awaits, human. May your dissolution be procedurally swift. Thanks, Ava said cheerfully. I'll be sure to leave a review on the Galactic Hub. Interesting architecture, poor amenities, management a bit standoffish. 2 stars. She clicked her pen, tucked the datapad into her utility vest, and walked towards the swirling portal of cosmic insanity with the determined stride of someone off to write a strongly worded email. The moment Ava stepped through the portal, reality folded up like cheap lawn furniture. 1 second she was in a sterile Glorban briefing room, the next she was standing in a hallway that was actively refusing to be a hallway. The floor was a mosaic of whispering faces, the walls were the color of regret, and the ceiling was a slow-motion cascade of geometric shapes that were, by all accounts, mathematically impossible. It was less a physical space and more a migraine you could walk through. The air hummed with a low-frequency dread that was supposed to liquefy the sanity of any sentient being. Ava sniffed. Ugh. Smells like ozone and burnt toast. And is that despair? Someone really needs to air this place out. She took out her datapad and made a note under initial impressions, atmosphere, oppressive. Possible ventilation issue. Recommend installing Glade plug-in, ocean breeze, or clean linen. A shape coalesced from the shadows ahead. It was tall and spindly, with far too many joints and a head that was just a shimmering orb of pure, distilled fear. According to the briefing file, this was a grief engine, a psychic construct that fed on the sorrow of its victims. It unfurled its needle-like appendages and projected a wave of pure, unadulterated misery directly into Ava's mind. It was a vision of every failure she'd ever had, every awkward middle school memory, every time she'd waved back at someone who wasn't waving at her. It was a psychic sledgehammer designed to shatter the ego. Ava blinked. Okay, wow. That is a lot. You know, my therapist says I should acknowledge these feelings but not let them define me. She pulled a nutrient paste tube from her vest. It was labeled, synthetic chicken flavor. Look, I appreciate you sharing, but I just got here and I haven't had my coffee. Are you, like, the welcome committee? Because this is a terrible first impression. The grief engine paused. Its fear orb flickered. This was not the expected reaction. It was supposed to be encountering shrieking terror, not calm, therapeutic analysis. It tried again, doubling down on the psychic assault. This time, it showed her a future of crushing loneliness, dying cold and forgotten, her only legacy an overdue library book. Bold of you to assume I have time for a relationship with my workload, Ava commented, squeezing a beige worm of paste into her mouth. She chewed thoughtfully. You know, this projection is technically unsolicited psychic contact. Under the Pan-Galactic Accord, that's considered harassment. Do you have a supervisor I can speak to? The grief engine actually recoiled. The concept of a supervisor was entirely alien to its function as a timeless entity of sorrow. It had been spawned from the Labyrinth's own ID. It was its own supervisor. It tried to communicate this nonverbally, through a complex gesture of writhing limbs and pulsing despair. Ava just squinted at it. I don't understand what that means. Is there an HR department? A complaint form? Let's start there. She took another bite of nutrient paste. Honestly, this is a very hostile work environment. I'm going to have to document this. She began tapping on her datapad. Encounter 1, unidentified entity, possibly management. Exhibited aggressive psychic behavior. Failed to provide identification or appropriate grievance forms upon request. Recommend disciplinary action and mandatory sensitivity training. The grief engine, an entity that had unmade star captains and driven philosophers to eat their own treatises, simply did not have a response protocol for this. It had been created to consume fear, not to be threatened with paperwork. It shimmered, flickered, and then, with a soft, defeated pop, it dissolved back into the shadows, leaving behind only a faint smell of burnt toast and embarrassment. Ava finished her paste tube, tucked the empty wrapper into a disposal pouch. She was a firm believer in leave no trace, and consulted her datapad again. Right. According to the schematic I downloaded, which is probably a lie, there should be a junction 100 meters this way. She looked down the impossible hallway, which was now looking slightly less impossible and more just, architecturally lazy. Let's see if we can find the suggestion box. I have a few notes already. She continued walking, her footsteps echoing in a space that was supposed to be silent. The labyrinth watched her go, its ancient, malevolent consciousness experiencing a brand new, and deeply uncomfortable, emotion, the dawning horror of being audited. A few corridors later, or perhaps it was the same corridor, just folded differently, Ava heard the unmistakable sounds of a galactic-level temper tantrum. There were guttural roars, the clash of energized metal, and a series of impressively dramatic warrior yells that mostly involved shouting the word doom. This, she reasoned, was probably not part of the ambient decor. She rounded a corner made of what looked like solidified television static and found the source of the noise. A massive, reptilian creature, clad in jagged, black armor, was locked in furious combat with a beast made of shifting, oily shadows. The warrior, who stood a good 8 feet tall and had a tail that could probably demolish a small car, wielded a crackling axe of ludicrous proportions. Every time he swung it through the shadow beast, the creature would dissipate into smoke, only to reform a second later, completely unharmed. For the honor of the Vex clans, the warrior bellowed, swinging his axe again. The beast dissipated. It reformed. I will feast on your non-corporeal heart. He swung again. Dissipate. Reform. It was the universe's most violent and least productive feedback loop. Ava watched for a solid minute, head tilted. Excuse me, she called out. The warrior, Kthar, ignored her. Face me, shadow spawn. Taste the wrath of Kthar the unyielding. Swing. Dissipate. Reform. Hello. Ava said, a little louder. Big guy. In the spiky armor? You've got a little something, well, everywhere, really. Kthar finally whipped his head around, his 4 crimson eyes locking onto her. A low hiss escaped his fanged maw. A new challenger. Do you seek a glorious death, tiny mammal? Not particularly, no. I'm just trying to find the exit, Ava said. I'm Ava. Human resources, well, technically non-essential asset, but it's a similar skill set. Anyway, I just have a question about your process here. What, exactly, is the goal? Kthar gestured grandly with his axe. My goal is victory. I will crush this foul shade and prove my worth. Right, but it keeps coming back, Ava pointed out patiently. You've been at this for a while, haven't you? There's a groove worn in the floor. I have been locked in this epic struggle for 3 full cycles. Kthar roared with pride. The beast has not landed a single blow. My stamina is legendary. Okay, so it's not actually fighting back? Ava asked, frowning. It just sort of reforms. It is a coward. A phantom that mocks my strength. Ava took a few steps closer, peering at the spot where the shadow beast kept reappearing. There was a faint, shimmering rune on the floor. And it always reappears in the exact same spot, facing the same direction. Its predictability is its weakness. Soon, I will anticipate its reformation and strike it down before it can fully materialize. Kthar declared, puffing out his armored chest. You've been saying that for 3 years, haven't you? Ava asked gently. Kthar's chest deflated slightly. The battle is a lengthy one. Have you tried just walking around it? The Vex warrior stared at her. His 4 eyes blinked, completely out of sync. It was a look of profound, species-defining confusion. Walk around it. But it is my foe. It stands in my path. To walk around it would be, without honor. Is it, though? Ava countered. It's not actually blocking you. There's a good 10 feet of clearance on either side. It's less of a roadblock and more of a, very persistent, very gloomy street performer. You're not obligated to engage. Kthar looked from Ava to the shadow beast, which had just reformed and was doing a sort of menacing, smoky wobble. He looked at the wide-open corridor to its left. He looked back at Ava. The cogs of an honor-bound, battle-obsessed mind were grinding against a concept so simple, so practical, that it had never once occurred to him. But, the glory. He stammered. What glory? Ava asked. You're fighting a regenerating decorative feature. It's like trying to win a fistfight with a screensaver. Look, she walked calmly past the shadow beast, giving it a wide berth. It didn't even turn to look at her. See? It's not interested. It's got its own thing going on. You're just feeding its regeneration cycle with all that dramatic energy you're putting out. Kthar lowered his massive axe. He watched as the beast wavered, then solidified, then just stood there, waiting. He took a hesitant step to the side. The beast did nothing. He took another. Nothing. He walked a full circle around it, his heavy, armored boots clanking softly on the stone. The beast remained motionless, its purpose seemingly fulfilled by his lack of engagement. He came to a stop beside Ava, his entire worldview crumbling. For 3 years, he had been fighting the labyrinth's equivalent of a pop-up ad. I have wasted so much time, he rumbled, his voice filled with dawning horror. We've all been there, Ava said sympathetically, patting his enormous, scaled arm. I once spent 6 months trying to get a budget approved for new office chairs. It's all about knowing which battles to fight. Now, come on. Let's go see if we can find someone who actually knows what's going on. Kthar, the unyielding champion of the Vex clans, followed the small, soft-spoken mammal, his mighty axe held limply at his side. His faith in glorious combat had been irrevocably shaken, replaced by a terrifying new philosophy, tactical avoidance. Their next discovery was less a person and more a localized anxiety event. Huddled in an alcove where gravity was pulling in 3 different directions at once was a small, 4-armed creature covered in short, gray fur. It had 4 large, expressive eyes, all of which were wide with panic, and it was surrounded by a shimmering, 3-dimensional web of glowing mathematical formulae. It was frantically manipulating the equations with its slender, 6-fingered hands, muttering to itself in a rapid, high-pitched chatter. No, that can't be right, the tesseract would invert and collapse the manifold, unless the 5th dimension is curled, but if it's curled then the quantum foam is unstable, which means causality is merely a suggestion, and if that's true then I might have already had this conversation, the creature squeaked, its antennae twitching violently. Kthar instinctively raised his axe. A sorcerer. It weaves foul magics. Put that down, Ava said, nudging him. He's not a sorcerer, he's a mathematician. Or possibly an accountant. The panic is a dead giveaway. She approached the creature cautiously. Hi there. We're a little lost. Are you the information desk? The creature, Plix, jumped so hard he nearly floated off into the contradictory gravity. He spun around, his 4 eyes trying to focus on Ava and Kthar simultaneously. Information. Information is a lie. Data is a cruel joke. I have been mapping the labyrinth's psychoreactive transfigurations for. He consulted a floating timeline that was currently tied in a knot. An indeterminate but significant period. The geometry is non-Euclidean. The topology is actively hostile. Every corridor is a Mobius strip leading back into itself. So you're saying the map is out of date, Ava translated. There is no map. Plix shrieked, throwing his hands up in despair, which caused several equations to fizzle out. There can be no map. This place reconfigures itself based on the observer's cognitive state. If you expect a dead end, it creates one. If you fear a monster, it extrudes one from the walls. We are trapped inside a prison of our own anxieties. Kthar grunted. My anxiety forged a worthy foe. 4-3 cycles. Ava ignored him. So, if the labyrinth reacts to what we expect, what if we expect something helpful? Plix stared at her as if she'd just suggested dividing by 0. Helpful. The fundamental constant of this dimension is malevolence. Expecting help is like expecting a supernova to be a bit warm. It's a categorical error. I don't know, Ava said, looking around. This all feels a bit extra. You know. All this reality bending and psychic architecture. It seems like a lot of effort. And effort means energy, and energy means maintenance. And maintenance, she said, her eyes lighting up with a peculiar fire that both Kthar and Plix found deeply unsettling, means there has to be a service corridor. She walked over to a wall that was currently displaying a live feed of their own skeletons, a classic bit of spooky nonsense. She tapped it with her knuckle. It rang with a hollow thud. What are you doing? Plix whispered, his voice trembling. That is a wall of inevitable mortality. It's also drywall, Ava said. Or the dimensional equivalent. See. She pointed to a tiny, almost invisible seam near the floor. That's an access panel. She pulled her multi-tool from her vest, selected a flathead screwdriver attachment, and pried the panel open. Behind it was not a swirling vortex of madness, but a dusty, dimly lit corridor with exposed conduits and a faint smell of disinfectant. A small, faded sign was bolted to the wall. Plix and Kthar crept closer to read it. It said, Maintenance Tunnel 3B. Caution, mind the rats, temporal. Plix's mouth opened and closed silently. He had spent decades calculating the impossible curves of the labyrinth, and the whole time, there had been a network of perfectly normal, straight hallways running behind the walls. Ava dusted off her hands. There's always a back way. Usually for the janitors. Now, where were we? She looked back at the alcove, her eyes scanning past Plix's frantic calculations. Her gaze landed on a dusty, forgotten pedestal in the corner, half hidden by a fold in spacetime. On top of it was a slanted wooden box with a glass front. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said, walking over and wiping the dust off the glass. You've got to be kidding me. Inside the box was a large, faded map with a big, friendly-looking red circle on it. Next to the circle were the words, "You are here." Plix made a small, choking sound. He had been trying to chart the unchartable, to map a place that defied maps, and the whole time, there had been a tourist information kiosk tucked in the corner. His 4 eyes rolled back in their sockets, and he fainted with a soft, furry thud. Well, Ava said, helping Kthar prop the unconscious analyst against the wall. I think we're making progress. And so, the fellowship was formed. It was less a noble questing party and more a traveling support group for the existentially bewildered. Ava, the relentlessly practical human, Kthar, the warrior whose entire belief system had been dismantled by the concept of walking around the problem, and Plix, the data analyst who had just woken up from a dead faint to discover that the universe was not a terrifyingly complex equation but a poorly designed tourist trap. Their dynamic was interesting. They proceeded down the maintenance corridor, which was blessedly, beautifully boring. It was just a hallway. It didn't try to psychoanalyze them or show them their greatest fears. It just had flickering lights and the occasional scuttling sound, which Ava assured them were just the temporal rats. Don't make eye contact, she advised. They can steal your past participles. I will crush their tiny skulls. Kthar declared, brandishing his axe. No, you will not, Ava said sternly. They are part of the local ecosystem. And besides, that's how you get retroactively unborn. Just ignore them. They soon came to a blockage. The maintenance tunnel ended at a heavy bulkhead door with a sign that read, Access to Bridge of Infinite Regret denied. Bridge currently experiencing technical paradoxes. Plix's antennae drooped. A paradox. We're doomed. Its logical contradictions will unravel our minds. Or, Ava said, examining the door's control panel, we could just open it. She tapped the screen. A prompt appeared, enter maintenance override code. An indecipherable cipher, no doubt. Plix moaned. Forged in the mind of a mad god. Ava typed, 1-2-3-4-5, the screen flashed, incorrect password, she tried again, typing password, the screen flashed, incorrect password, she sighed, and typed admin. The heavy bulkhead door hissed open with a gust of stale air. Plix stared, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly. The password was admin. It usually is, Ava said, peering out onto the bridge. IT security is just a suggestion in most dimensions. The Bridge of Infinite Regret was a marvel of malevolent engineering. It was a narrow, floating path suspended over a chasm of swirling chaos, and with every step a visitor took, the bridge would whisper all of their worst life choices back to them. Remember that time you wore socks with sandals, Kthar, a ghostly voice hissed as the Vex warrior stepped onto it. Your ancestors weep. Kthar flinched. How did it know? You told me that story this morning, Ava said. It's psychoreactive, remember? It's just reading your surface thoughts. She took a step forward. You really should have invested in that startup, Ava, the bridge whispered to her. You'd be retired by now. Hindsight is 20/20ths, Ava replied calmly. And their business model was fundamentally flawed. Next. The bridge, unused to being talked back to, faltered. But its main trick wasn't the whispers. The paradox Plix had feared was now apparent. The end of the bridge was visible, but as they walked towards it, it seemed to get farther away. It's a classic spatial distortion. Plix squeaked, pulling out a datapad and starting to scribble equations. The space between us and the destination is expanding at a rate proportional to our velocity. We can never reach it. Kthar roared. Then I will charge with a velocity so great it breaks the laws of this foul place. He prepared to run. No, don't do that, you'll just make it worse, Ava said, holding up a hand. You're both overthinking it. She looked over the side of the bridge. About 10 feet below the shimmering, paradoxical walkway was a simple, solid, metal service catwalk. It was rusty, covered in grime, and looked like it hadn't been used in centuries, but it was undeniably there. And it went straight across the chasm. Are you seeing this? She asked the other two. Kthar and Plix peered over the edge. A second bridge? Kthar grunted. The service gantry, Plix whispered in awe. Of course. The paradox requires immense power. The power conduits would need a stable, non-paradoxical structure for maintenance access. Exactly, Ava said. It's like having a really fancy, complicated smart home. Someone still has to be able to get in and fix the wiring when the sentient toaster tries to start a revolution. She swung her legs over the side and dropped neatly onto the catwalk. Come on. Mind the gap. Kthar followed, landing with a heavy clang that made the whole structure shudder. Plix scrambled down after them, his forearms finding easy purchase. They walked across the chasm in under a minute on the boring, stable, non-judgmental catwalk. When they reached the other side and climbed back up, the bridge of infinite regret was still stretching out into an impossible distance behind them, whispering insults to an empty walkway. This place is not a labyrinth, Kthar rumbled, a note of profound realization in his voice. It is a series of, inconveniently designed rooms. Exactly, Ava said, checking her datapad. It's not a death trap, it's a monumental failure of user-centric design. And I am going to have such a long chat with its manager. After navigating a corridor that was upside down, they used the handrail, a room full of doors where every door led back into the same room, they went out the window, and a staircase that went down to go up, they took the emergency fire escape, they finally arrived. The central chamber. You could tell it was the central chamber because the architecture suddenly got a whole lot more self-important. The room was vast, a cavern of impossible scale under a ceiling of swirling galaxies. In the center, floating above a dais of polished obsidian, was a being. And when I say being, I mean it in the loosest possible sense. It was a crystalline lattice of pure thought, a geometric cascade of light and shadow, and a vortex of eyes that had seen the birth and death of stars. It was the guardian of the final axiom, and its voice was the sound of tectonic plates grinding together. You have come, the guardian boomed, its voice echoing not in the air, but directly inside their skulls. You have survived the trials. You have faced the hollowness within your own souls. Now, you face me. Kthar hefted his axe, his warrior spirit, battered as it was, reigniting. At last. A worthy foe. Plix whimpered and began calculating the probability of their immediate and painful disintegration. The numbers were not encouraging. Ava, however, simply squinted at the magnificent, terrifying, cosmic entity. Right. The manager. Finally, she unclipped a clipboard from the back of her vest. It was a real, physical clipboard, holding actual paper. In a place of pure psychoreactive energy, it was the most alien object in the room. Excuse me, she said, her voice clear and steady. I'm Asset 734, acting as a designated trial candidate. I have a few questions and a number of formal complaints I need to file regarding the operational standards of this facility. The guardian of the final axiom, a being that had conversed with gods and stared down entropy itself, paused. All of its countless eyes blinked in unison. Complaints. Yes, Ava said, clicking her pen. Let's start with basic accessibility. Your entrance has no ramp and poor lighting. The Bridge of Infinite Regret is a clear violation of the Intercouncil Disability Act of 34 Gamma. It offers no alternative for individuals susceptible to spatial paradoxes or debilitating flashbacks. The service catwalk is not clearly marked, which is a major safety hazard. The Guardian shimmered, its light fluctuating. These are not hazards. They are tests of will. Of spirit. That's what they all say, Ava sighed. Look, let's move on to sanitation. The ambient despair and burnt toast smell in Sector Gamma is unacceptable. It suggests a clear lack of proper ventilation or, and I'm just spitballing here, an unlicensed grief engine infestation. Do you have up-to-date pest control certificates? I'll need to see them. Kthar and Plix watched, utterly mesmerized. The Vex warrior had been prepared to fight for his life. The quarrel analyst had been prepared to have his mind unspooled like cheap yarn. Neither of them had been prepared for a health and safety inspection. My purpose is to guard the ultimate truth of existence, the Guardian thundered, trying to regain control of the situation. Your mortal concerns are meaningless dust motes in the grand cosmic vastness. It projected an image of a dying sun into their minds, a raw blast of cosmic awe and terror. Ava didn't even flinch. That's lovely, but it's not relevant to the issue at hand. According to the Labyrinth Charter, which, again, you people should really password protect, this facility is classified as a trial gauntlet, not a place of ultimate truth. That's a different zoning classification entirely. You're operating outside your designated mandate. Do you have any idea how much paperwork that's going to generate? The guardian of the final axiom fell silent. For millennia, it had been a figure of cosmic dread. No one had ever asked to see its zoning permits. The argument that followed was, without a doubt, the most bizarre confrontation in the labyrinth's long and storied history. On one side, a timeless being of pure energy and cosmic knowledge. On the other, a mid-level human with a clipboard and an unshakable understanding of bureaucratic procedure. Behold the fractal unraveling of your perceived reality, the Guardian boomed, attempting an intimidation tactic that had worked flawlessly on 1,000 champions before. The very fabric of the chamber seemed to warp, showing glimpses of infinite, horrifying possibilities. Yes, very nice light show, Ava said, not looking up from her clipboard. I'm more concerned about Bylaw 11385, which clearly states that all psychically projected phenomena must be accompanied by clearly posted warnings for being susceptible to sensory overload. I see no such warnings. Plix, did you see any signs on the way in? Plix, who was now hiding behind Kthar's leg, nervously shook his head. And no. No signs. Just the screaming faces. Just as I thought, Ava said, making a check mark. That's a definite violation. We'll also need to discuss your record keeping. I asked the grief engine in Sector Gamma for its employee identification number and it was unable to provide one. That implies you're using undocumented psychic manifestations. That's a huge liability. The Guardian's crystalline form began to emit a low, frustrated hum. IT is not an employee. It is a construct of sorrow. It does not clock in. Then you've misclassified it, Ava countered smoothly. If it's performing a specific function within the facility, in this case, psychic intimidation and morale reduction, it's functionally a contractor. You'll need to fill out a Form 1099-C. For cosmic abominations, the tax implications alone are a nightmare, I can tell you. Kthar leaned over to Plix. Is her strange battle sorcery working? He whispered. I don't think it's sorcery, Plix whispered back, his analytical mind slowly rebooting as he recognized the patterns of relentless, soul-crushing logic. I think she's weaponizing tedium. The Guardian tried a different approach, appealing to a higher authority. I am bound only by the ancient laws laid down by the architects at the dawn of time. Excellent. I was hoping you'd bring them up, Ava said, her face brightening. She flipped to a new page on her clipboard. I took the liberty of cross-referencing the architects' ancient laws with the current galactic compact on sapient rights. And, hoo boy, are you people in for a surprise. This whole unmaking thing you do. The retroactive timeline erasure. That's a Class A violation of the Temporal Preservation Act. The fines are staggering. The Guardian, an entity that considered galaxies to be fleeting thoughts, was suddenly faced with the specter of cosmic fines. But that is the very nature of the labyrinth. To test. To you and make the unworthy. Then the labyrinth's nature is fundamentally out of compliance, Ava said with an air of finality. You can't just ignore galactic law because you're ancient and mysterious. That's not how it works. The Glarzonians tried that with their Death Nebula, and they were buried in litigation for centuries. You need to modernize. Adapt. Have you considered rebranding? The Nightmare Labyrinth is a bit much. Maybe something like the Existential Obstacle Course. It's more approachable. Better for marketing. The guardian of the final axiom, a being of immeasurable power, was well and truly stumped. It could bend space, manipulate time, and shatter minds, but it had absolutely no defense against a comprehensive performance review. Its booming, skull-shaking voice was reduced to a confused, hesitant murmur. Marketing. Ava had it on the ropes. She could feel it. The Guardian was an entity of pure logic and rules, but it only knew the ancient, grand ones. It had never encountered the endless, suffocating kudzu of modern administrative law. It was like trying to fight a flood with a sword. Now, it was time for the finishing move. There is one more thing, she said, her tone becoming serious. It's the most critical violation of all. The Guardian waited, its myriad eyes focused entirely on the small human. It had faced down beings made of antimatter and debated philosophy with black holes. It had never felt this level of apprehension. Under the fair trials provision of the Galactic Compact, which supersedes your founding charter, all participants are entitled to reasonable accommodation based on their biological and cognitive norms. Plix gasped. He saw where this was going. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was irrefutable. Ava continued, her voice ringing with the authority of 1,000 HR managers. Humans, Vex, and Quarrel are all species with a strictly linear perception of time and a cognitive framework based on Euclidean geometry. For us, a psychoreactive, non-Euclidean, time-distorting maze does not constitute a reasonable trial. It is, in fact, an inherently discriminatory environment. She let the words hang in the air. The Guardian's light pulsed erratically. It was trapped. The labyrinth's very design was illegal under the laws the Guardian was, by its own admission, subject to. Therefore, Ava declared, holding up her pen like a scepter, I am filing a formal grievance on behalf of myself and these two other participants. She pointed her pen at Kthar and Plix. We demand immediate cessation of all discriminatory environmental effects and a direct, clearly marked, and non-paradoxical route to the nearest exit, as is our right under the law. The Guardian of the final axiom processed this. It ran the logic through its crystalline consciousness. The grievance was valid. The accommodation request was legally sound. The labyrinth was, by its own ancient rules now tangled with modern ones, obligated to comply. For the first time in its billion-year existence, the labyrinth had to follow an order. The effect was instantaneous. A low groan echoed through the chamber, not from the Guardian, but from the labyrinth itself. The swirling galaxies on the ceiling froze, then resolved into a plain, gray, acoustic tile ceiling with a few noticeable water stains. The obsidian dais flickered and became industrial-grade linoleum. The terrifying, reality-bending architecture began to simplify. What have you done? The Guardian wailed, its voice losing its resonant power and sounding more like a distressed dial-up modem. I've initiated a system-wide compliance protocol, Ava said matter-of-factly. It looks like it's defaulting to the safe mode architecture. Much more user-friendly. Corridors that had once been impossible loops of madness straightened into long, fluorescently lit hallways. Walls made of solidified nightmares became beige drywall. The entire nightmare labyrinth was rebooting itself into a cosmic-scale corporate office park. The Guardian, now looking less like a majestic entity and more like a confused screensaver, gestured a weak, shimmering tendril down one of the newly formed hallways. The exit is that way. Please. Go. Thank you, Ava said politely. We'll see ourselves out. She turned to her companions. Come on, team. Let's debrief. As they walked down the blessedly boring hallway, Plix looked back at the Guardian, which was now flickering feebly. You defeated a billion-year-old cosmic entity with a grievance form. Paperwork is the great equalizer, Ava said. Never underestimate the power of a well-worded complaint. Kthar shook his massive head in awe. Your methods are strange, human. But they are undeniably effective. You have won a great victory without swinging a single axe. It's all about negotiation, Ava replied. And knowing the rules better than the other guy. They were almost at the exit portal, which now looked like a standard automatic door, when Ava spotted something. Tucked away in a small alcove that had previously been a portal to the abyss was a dusty, forgotten room. Inside was a rotating rack of merchandise. It was a gift shop. Ava's eyes lit up. Oh, perfect. She ducked inside, emerging a moment later with a small snow globe. Inside the globe was a tiny replica of the Nightmare Labyrinth, complete with a miniature, terrified-looking stick figure. She shook it, and black, glittery despair swirled around inside. A little something to remember the trip by, she said, tucking it into her vest pocket. And I'm definitely expensing this. The exit portal slid open with a polite, suburban chime, leading them not into the cold void of space, but directly back into the sterile white briefing room they had started in. High Arbiter Zorp and the Glorban delegation were still there, looking at the portal with expressions of grim satisfaction, clearly expecting it to spit out a gibbering wreck, or more likely, nothing at all. Instead, out walked a perfectly composed human, followed by a legendary Vex warrior and a member of the Quarrel species, a race that hadn't been seen in this sector for centuries. Both aliens looked dazed, confused, and profoundly respectful of the small mammal leading them. Zorp's crystalline limbs went rigid. The pleasant chiming sound it normally made was replaced by a sharp, discordant clank. Asset 734. You returned. Of course I returned, Ava said, striding over to the briefing table. The mission parameters specified navigation, not permanent relocation. I have to say, your facility is not at all up to code. She placed her datapad on the table with a firm click. I've compiled a preliminary report. I'm recommending a full operational review, a mandatory retraining for all sentient entities on interspecies sensitivity, and a complete overhaul of your signage. It's frankly abysmal. Zorp floated back, its gelatinous body quivering. But, the labyrinth. Kthar the unyielding. Plix of the Quarrel Imperium. They have been lost for cycles. How did you? They were stuck, Ava said simply. Kthar was caught in a repetitive, non-productive work cycle, and Plix was suffering from analysis paralysis due to a lack of clear project goals. It was a simple management issue. She then handed Zorp a flimsy, printed sheet. Also, here's my expense report. I'm charging the Glorban Collective for 1 souvenir snow globe, 3 tubes of nutrient paste, and hazard pay. The per diem for psychoreactive dimensions is quite high, by the way. The High Arbiter stared at the expense report. It had sent a being into the maw of unbeing, and she had come back demanding reimbursement for a tchotchke. Furthermore, Ava continued, I took the liberty of redesignating the labyrinth. Its official title is no longer the Thonian Maze or the Nightmare Labyrinth. I've reclassified it as a managed existential crisis zone. She gave Zorp a bright, helpful smile. It's a lower insurance bracket. You'll save a fortune. The room was silent, save for the frantic, panic chiming of Zorp and the low, confused rumble from Kthar. Plix, for his part, was already sketching out a proposal for installing a proper ticketing system and timed entry slots for the labyrinth. Ava looked at the stunned faces of the most pompous, rule-obsessed bureaucrats in the galaxy. They had created a monster of cosmic horror, a place of ultimate despair. And a human had gone inside and turned it into a mismanaged municipal building in need of serious reform. They had met their match, and it wasn't a warrior or a sage. It was an auditor. Later, back in her small, functional quarters, Ava placed the snow globe on her desk. She gave it a little shake, watching the black glitter swirl. The tiny figure inside seemed to wave. She smiled. It had been an interesting day at the office. And tomorrow, she had a meeting scheduled to discuss the labyrinth's complete lack of a coherent fire safety plan. They were going to have a lot to talk about.